Most nights in the high country passed in silence, broken only by the howl of wind or the distant crack of ice splitting on the ridges. But that night was different. That night the mountains seemed to hold their breath, as though something hidden in their shadows had finally stirred. Ethan Cole, a seasoned mountain patrol officer, had seen his share of storms and dangers, but nothing in his 36 years of life could have prepared him for what he would face beneath the ghostly glow of the Colorado peaks. Snow fell in fierce whirls, cutting across the beams of his cruiser's headlights as he navigated the narrow pass. Ethan leaned forward, jaw set, scanning the shifting white. Out here, storms weren't just bad weather. They were a force, and if you weren't careful, they could swallow a man whole. His hands gripped the wheel firmly, the faint light of the dashboard flickering in rhythm with the storm's angry pulse. He had always been the kind of man who felt more at home in these lonely, dangerous places than in the warm laughter of town gatherings. Perhaps it was because the silence here was easier than the silence that followed him home. At first glance, Ethan looked like the very image of the mountain towns he patrolled. Tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark hair already marked by streaks of silver. His storm-gray eyes, always narrowed against snow or sun, seemed to measure every risk before it had a chance to happen. Locals in Silverton respected him for his calm authority. But few knew the scar he carried, the one that didn't show. Years ago, Ethan's younger brother had been lost during a cartel drug bust gone terribly wrong. And no amount of searching, no investigations or questions answered, had ever brought closure. The grief drove Ethan farther into these mountains, to the loneliest patrol routes, where the wilderness swallowed secrets and shadows lingered. The radio at his side sputtered and spat static before dying completely. Ethan frowned, twisting the dial. The storm wasn't bad enough to kill the signal. He tapped the unit, listening to nothing but silence. Something wasn't right. As the cruiser crept around a bend, his headlights swept over the snow, and there, just for a moment, something moved. At first he thought it was a branch torn loose, tossed by the wind. But then it shifted again, not random this time, but slow, weak, deliberate. Ethan stopped the cruiser and stepped out into the biting cold. His boots crunched on ice as the wind lashed against his heavy white sheriff's coat. He lifted his flashlight, its beam cutting through the swirling snow. The silence was so complete he could hear his own breath. And then he saw it. At the tree line, half buried in drifted snow, lay a German shepherd. Its sable coat was dull, ragged and stiff with frost. Its ribs pressed sharp against its skin, each rise and fall shallow from hunger and exhaustion. Still its ears twitched forward, and its brown eyes flickered between fear and defiance. The animal was on the edge of collapse, yet there was something noble still burning in its gaze. Then Ethan saw what froze him in place. Around the dog's neck wasn't a normal collar, but a thick black band of metal. It was smooth, fused as though it had been forged in one piece, and from its core pulsed a faint red light. With every pulse, Ethan's dead radio in the cruiser hissed once more with static. He crouched low, speaking softly, the same way he used to calm skittish horses back on his father's ranch. "Easy, boy," he murmured, voice steady. The shepherd growled weakly, not with aggression, but with the trembling sound of fear. Then its legs buckled, and it collapsed into the snow. Ethan's chest tightened. He slid his arms beneath the frail body, shocked by how little weight it carried. The dog whimpered but didn't fight. Its head sagged against his shoulder, and Ethan felt the faint hum of the strange collar vibrating against his arm. "What the hell are you wearing?" he muttered under his breath. There was no tag, no identification, only that pulse. Snow stung his face as he carried the shepherd back to the cruiser. He laid it gently across the back seat, tucking a heavy blanket around its shivering body. The dog's half-lidded eyes lifted, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw something in them. Recognition. Not of him, but of the badge, of the authority, of the silent promise that came with the presence of a lawman. This was no ordinary stray. His breath caught. Could this be a lost K9? He shook the thought away. Still, his hands tightened on the steering wheel as the dashboard flickered with interference again. Whatever that collar was, it wasn't harmless, he whispered under his breath, more to himself than to the shepherd. "You're not dying out here. Not on my watch." The cruiser's taillights vanished into the storm, leaving behind only whispering pines and the faint, eerie glow of red hidden beneath the blanket. The snow was still falling hard when Ethan pulled into the parking lot of Silverton's only veterinary clinic. The small log building sat huddled under its burden of snow, a single porch light glowing against the darkness. It was nearly midnight, but Ethan knew there was one person in this town who never turned away a living creature in need. Dr. Margaret Harper. He hurried inside, boots crunching on icy gravel, the shepherd cradled in his arms. The warmth of the clinic hit him with the smell of antiseptic, hay, and faint herbal teas. Shelves of supplies glimmered under the weak glow of a desk lamp. From the back room, footsteps hurried forward, and Margaret Harper appeared, startled. "Ethan Cole!" she exclaimed, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "What on earth are you carrying in here at this hour?" Margaret was in her early 50s, tall and willowy, her chestnut hair streaked with silver and tied back in a practical bun. Years of tending to broken animals and broken-hearted owners had left gentle lines around her hazel eyes, softening her steady, patient gaze. Her own husband, a wildlife officer, had died years ago in a failed sting against poachers, and from that day, her empathy had only grown. Ethan placed the shepherd carefully on the padded table, found him in the pass, half frozen, starving, and whatever that is around his neck. "It's not right." Harper's brisk tone softened the moment her eyes fell on the animal. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, slipping on her gloves. She moved with calm precision, checking the shepherd's ears, gums, paws. The dog whined softly but didn't resist, eyes darting briefly toward Ethan as if anchoring itself to him. Ethan crossed his arms, watching closely, shadows flickering across his face. Harper clipped away matted fur, revealing patches of raw, irritated skin. Then she stopped, her brows furrowing. "Ethan," she said quietly, "come look at this." Beneath the fur on the dog's shoulder, etched faintly into the skin, was a tattoo. Numbers and letters, faded but still precise. Harper leaned closer. "It's a K9 identification code. I've seen these before, years back, when retired units were brought here for checkups. This one's been altered, but it's still readable." Ethan's jaw clenched. His memory stirred. 5 years ago, there had been reports of a missing K9 during a raid on a mountain safe house. Officially, the dog was declared dead, vanished during a firefight. No body had ever been found. "That's impossible," Ethan muttered. "I remember that case. We searched for weeks." Harper's eyes lifted to his. "And yet here he is." The shepherd whimpered softly. Harper stroked his head, murmuring soothing words. Ethan's hand found the animal's side, steady and protective. The dog's breathing slowed at his touch, eyes fluttering closed in trust. "What about the collar?" Ethan asked. Harper examined the strange black band more closely, tapping it lightly with a tool. The red light pulsed, making the clinic's lamps flicker for a moment. Harper flinched, her expression darkening. "This isn't veterinary equipment. I don't know what it is, but it's not safe. It's designed for more than restraint." She hesitated. "We'll need to cut it off, but it looks fused, embedded somehow. Removing it recklessly could kill him." Ethan's chest tightened. He had seen many things in his years on the force. Drug labs, weapons caches, smuggling operations, but never anything like this. A police dog stolen, branded, collared with technology that disrupted radios and electronics. "Do what you can for him tonight," Ethan said firmly. "I'll figure out the rest." Harper nodded, adjusting her glasses. "He'll need fluids, warmth, rest. He's tougher than he looks, or he wouldn't have survived this long." She glanced at Ethan with a faint smile, much like his rescuer. For the next hour, the clinic filled with the quiet rhythm of care. Harper set up an IV line, her hands steady despite the storm rattling against the windows. Ethan stayed close, occasionally adjusting the blanket over the shepherd. Each time the dog stirred, his gaze sought Ethan's, as though testing a fragile bond. Finally, Harper stepped back. "He'll make it through the night." "But Ethan," she hesitated, choosing her words, "if this is really a missing K9 from that case, then somebody has been hiding him. Someone wanted him alive, but not free." Ethan's eyes hardened. Then they're not finished. And now they'll know he's been found. The German shepherd let out a low growl, not of fear this time, but of memory. Something buried deep, surfacing like a shadow. Ethan rested a hand gently on his head. "You're safe now," he whispered. "Whatever they did to you, it ends here." Outside, the storm raged on. But within the small walls of Silverton's clinic, a quiet alliance was forming between a man haunted by loss, a woman who had endured grief, and a battered K9 whose return threatened to unear a buried crime. The morning after the storm, Silverton Pass lay blanketed in white silence. The streets were buried in snow, but the town had begun to stir again. Children bundled in coats making paths to the school bus. Shopkeepers sweeping off porches. Smoke curling from chimneys into the brittle air. For Ethan Cole, however, the peace was only surface deep. His thoughts remained anchored to the German shepherd lying in the back of his cruiser, a creature now under his protection, marked both by a fading tattoo and a collar that hummed like a threat. The dog had survived the night at Dr. Harper's clinic, and though still weak, he had found strength enough to lift his head and track Ethan with alert brown eyes. When Ethan returned that morning, the shepherd greeted him with a faint thump of his tail. It was the first sign of renewed life. Ethan had named him Ranger, a name that carried both strength and memory, as if the dog had once belonged to the mountain itself. Rers's sable coat was still ragged, but under Harper's care and Ethan's constant presence, there was resilience shining through. That afternoon, Ethan drove slowly through the snow-packed roads outside town. Ranger sitting upright in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed out the window with an intensity that made Ethan's chest tighten. The shepherd's ears pricked suddenly, and without warning he growled low, muscles stiffening. Ethan glanced toward him. "What is it, boy?" Ranger shifted, then lunged toward the door, pressing his paws against the glass. His nose pushed urgently against the cold pane as he barked sharply, a sound Ethan hadn't yet heard from him. Following Rers's line of sight, Ethan spotted a narrow road winding off the main path, leading into the trees where the snow hadn't yet been plowed. Something in Rers's posture told him this wasn't random. Ethan turned the cruiser down the road, tires crunching. The track led them deeper into the forest until at last an old structure appeared. A warehouse squat and forgotten, its wooden siding rotted and its roof sagging under decades of storms. The windows were black with grime and a rusted chain hung loosely from the front doors. The dog's growls deepened, vibrating with a raw emotion Ethan recognized. Memory. RER's fur bristled along his spine and his claws scraped at the floorboard. Ethan pulled the car to a stop, heart pounding as the realization struck. This place wasn't new to Ranger. He had been here before. Ethan stepped out into the snow, hand brushing against the grip of his holstered sidearm. Ranger followed, moving stiffly but with purpose, his nose low, tail rigid. Together they approached the warehouse. The door gave under Ethan's shove, groaning open to reveal darkness within. The smell hit them first. Rust, mildew, and something faintly metallic that spoke of chains and old blood. Inside, the weak light from Ethan's flashlight danced across rows of cages, their bars bent and corroded with rust. The cages were large enough for dogs, and within some frayed leashes and knotted collars lay discarded. Chains dangled from the walls, their ends scarred with scratches where claws had fought in vain for freedom. Rers's reaction was immediate. He let out a guttural snarl, the sound reverberating through the hollow space. His ears flattened, and he prowled forward, hackles raised, circling the cages with sharp barks that cracked against the silence. He pawed at the ground, whimpering once, then growling again, as though the shadows themselves carried memories of his suffering. Ethan followed slowly, his breath caught in his throat. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it. This was not a simple kennel. It was a prison. On a desk at the far end of the warehouse lay a weathered notebook. Its leather cover was stained, corners curling with age. Ethan picked it up carefully, flipping through the pages. His stomach churned as he read. Neat handwriting cataloging experiments, dosages, restraints, behavioral tests. Each entry referred to subjects by number, never name. Notes described the implantation of devices, responses to electrical pulses. the suppression of aggression. He turned one page and froze. The code scrolled in ink matched the faded tattoo on Ariars's skin. Subject K9 17 compliance high. Emotional resilience compromised. Memory interference, partial success. Ethan slammed the book shut, his fists clenching. Monsters, he muttered, his voice low and sharp. They treated you like equipment, not a partner. Ranger growled louder, his body trembling with a rage too deep for words. He clawed at one of the cages, teeth bared, before turning back to Ethan with eyes burning. The message was clear. This was my prison. This is where they broke me. A noise startled them both. The sudden flutter of wings as a raven burst through a broken window. Ethan's hand went to his weapon, but the bird disappeared into the snow outside. He exhaled slowly, his nerves tight as wires. Ranger moved closer to him, pressing against his leg as though reminding him they were not alone in this discovery. The warehouse creaked with age, the wind rattling loose boards. Ethan swept the flashlight across more of the interior. He found torn muzzles, broken syringes scattered on the floor, and on one wall crudely marks etched into the wood. Too many to count. Ethan pocketed the notebook, his jaw set like stone. Evidence. Proof. Whatever this was, it wasn't just cruelty. It was organized, systematic. Someone had taken K9 units, stolen them, and turned them into subjects of experiments. And Ranger was one of them. As they left the warehouse, Ranger paused at the threshold, staring back into the shadows with one last growl. Then he followed Ethan into the daylight, leaving behind the place that had caged him. Ethan closed the cruiser door and sat insolence for a long moment, the notebook heavy in his lap, the weight of its truth pressing harder than the snow on the roof. Ranger sat beside him, chest rising and falling, eyes forward, steady. "Not anymore," Ethan whispered, meeting the dog's gaze. "They don't get to keep you anymore." Outside, the abandoned warehouse stood silent, its secrets now torn open, its chains rattling faintly in the wind. The snow had not yet melted from Ethan's boots when he returned to Dr. Harper's clinic, the weathered notebook tucked under his arm like a live coal. Ranger followed close behind, his paws leaving neat tracks on the slush-covered steps. Though the shepherd still carried the gaunt look of malnutrition, his strength was slowly returning. His posture firmer, his gaze sharper. Every movement reminded Ethan that Ranger was no ordinary stray, but a trained K9. Once loyal, now scarred. Dr. Margaret Harper was in her office, glasses perched low on her nose, reading through veterinary journals scattered across her desk. She looked up when Ethan entered, her hazel eyes narrowing at the sight of the battered notebook. "You found something," she said, her voice taut. Ethan placed the book on the desk, flipping it open to the pages filled with numbers, codes, and behavioral notes. Harper scanned the entries, her expression tightening as she read phrases like subject compliance, memory suppression, and test group variance. Her fingers traced a stamped insignia on one page, a crimson falcon with its wings spread wide, talons outstretched. "That symbol," she murmured. "I've seen it before." Ethan leaned closer. "Where?" "Years ago," Harper said, removing her glasses. "When I attended a veterinary science conference in Billings, there was a research group presenting on neural conditioning for service animals. They called themselves Redstone Labs. Officially, they worked on rehabilitation techniques for traumatized dogs. Unofficially," her voice trailed off, her jaw tightening, "there were whispers that they pushed too far, methods that skirted ethics, maybe even the law. They vanished after a few scandals, but apparently they didn't stop working." Ranger growled, startling them both. His eyes were locked on the falcon symbol. The sound was not casual. His body trembled with a primal recognition, ears flat, lips pulled back over his teeth. He barked once, sharp and furious, then pawed at the page as if to tear the emblem out of existence. Ethan steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. "Easy, boy, I get it. You remember this, don't you? They did this to you." The shepherd whined low, his gaze never leaving the crimson falcon. His reaction was proof enough that Redstone Labs had been more than just a name in the notebook. For Ranger, it was the face of torment. Harper exhaled slowly. "If he reacts like that, he's not just been here briefly. He was conditioned, tested, broken under them." Her voice cracked with restrained anger. What kind of people use science to torture loyalty out of a creature like this? At that moment, the clinic's bell chimed as the door opened. A figure stepped in, brushing snow off his jacket. He was in his late 40s, with dark hair thinning at the temples, and a round, ruddy face framed by a salt-and-pepper beard. His green eyes carried both warmth and a quiet alertness. "Sheriff Cole," he greeted with a nod. Dr. Harper didn't mean to intrude. "Duty Mark Hanlon," Ethan said, a hint of surprise in his tone. "What brings you here?" Mark Hanlon was one of the few deputies who had chosen to stay in Silverton despite better offers elsewhere. A man of sturdy build, he carried himself with the calm of someone who had grown up in these mountains, raising 2 children with his wife after years of balancing shifts and farm chores. Known for his loyalty, Hanlon was dependable, though often overlooked because of his quiet demeanor. "I heard about the storm and saw your cruiser outside," Hanlon explained. "Figured you were dealing with something. Wanted to check in." His eyes fell to Ranger, who sat rigid, tail thumping once as if acknowledging the deputy's presence, but never relaxing. Harper closed the notebook quickly, but Hanlon's gaze lingered. "That book doesn't look like a standard case file." Ethan chose his words carefully. "It's not founded out by the old warehouse on Mill Creek Road. Cages, chains, evidence of experiments, and this." He opened the book again to reveal the falcon emblem. Hanlon's face darkened. "Redstone Labs, I've heard that name. When I was a rookie, there were rumors about dogs disappearing from small departments across the state. Always German Shepherds, always K9 trained. Nobody ever proved anything." "Looks like we just did," Ethan said grimly. Ranger barked again, startling Hanlon, who instinctively took a step back. "He doesn't like that, Mark," Hanlon said, almost under his breath. "He remembers it," Ethan corrected. Whatever Redstone did, Ranger lived through it. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Snow tapped against the clinic windows, muffling the town beyond. Harper finally broke the quiet. "If Redstone's still out there, then this isn't over. They'll know one of their test subjects has escaped. They may even come looking." Hanlon rubbed his jaw, his voice low. "Then we need to be ready." Ethan met his deputy's eyes. "Not we, me. This is personal now. Ranger deserves justice, and so do the other dogs they've taken." Ranger stood then, moving to Ethan's side, head held high, body steady. For the first time since Ethan had found him in the storm, he no longer looked like a victim, but like a soldier ready to fight. His growl was not fear, it was a vow. Ethan looked at the notebook again. The crimson falcon glaring back, his grip tightened on the worn leather cover. "Redstone Labs thought they could bury this," he said, his voice low, unyielding. "But we're going to dig them out." The shepherd gave a sharp bark, echoing his promise. The wind howled down from the ridges above Silverton Pass, carrying with it shards of ice and the eerie stillness of mountains that had learned to swallow secrets. Ethan Cole tightened his scarf against the bitter cold as he steered his cruiser toward the abandoned warehouse. Ranger sat beside him in the passenger seat, posture alert, his breath fogging the glass. The shepherd had grown stronger in the last 2 days, though the scars beneath his fur and the haunted gleam in his eyes betrayed a history that no rest could fully erase. Still tonight his ears pricked forward, as if he already knew trouble awaited them. The warehouse loomed out of the darkness, its warped timbers groaning against the weight of snow. Ethan's headlights cut across the broken windows and the rusted chain still hanging from the front doors. He killed the engine, the night collapsing into silence, except for the sigh of the storm. Ranger gave a low growl, nose twitching as he stared toward the structure. Ethan trusted the dog's instincts, hand brushing over the cold steel of his sidearm. He opened the door, boots crunching in the snow. "Let's keep it quiet, boy," he whispered. Ranger leapt down, paws sinking deep into the powder, body coiled with readiness. The warehouse interior was no longer the still, desolate place they had left it. Through a crack in the wall, Ethan spotted movement shadows bending under the beam of flashlights. He crouched low, signaling Ranger to stay close. Voices drifted through the gap, muffled but urgent. "Set the charge there." "We don't leave anything behind," one voice commanded, low and clipped. A second voice answered, younger and tense. "We've got 2 more to plant, Then we're clear. Ethan's jaw tightened. They weren't scavengers. These men were professionals tasked with erasing the evidence Ethan had found. He motioned Ranger forward. Together they slipped around to a side entrance where the door sagged on broken hinges. Ethan peered inside. Two figures moved with efficiency, dressed in dark tactical coats dusted with snow. One waist-tall and wiry, his face sharp with angular features and a thin scar running from his jaw to his temple. His pale blue eyes darted constantly, calculating, alert. The other was broader, younger, perhaps late 20s, with a thick beard and a nervous twitch in his movements, as though he lacked the resolve of his partner. The tall one crouched near a steel beam, wiring explosives with steady hands. The younger man fumbled with a detonator, muttering under his breath. Rare's hackles rose. A low growl slipped from his throat before Ethan could quiet him. The sound echoed in the cavernous space. The tall man's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "We're not alone," he hissed. In that instant, Ranger surged forward like a bullet fired from the dark. His paws hammered against the concrete floor, teeth bared. The younger man panicked, dropping the detonator as he stumbled backward. Ethan charged in behind the shepherd, weapon drawn. Chaos erupted. The tall man yanked a pistol from beneath his coat, firing a shot that sparked against a steel beam. Ranger leapt, knocking the weapon from his hand with a ferocious snap of jaws. The man cursed, swinging a fist, but the dog was too quick, dancing back with a guttural snarl. The younger man bolted toward the far door, slipping on patches of ice that had crept through the broken walls. "I'm out of here," he shouted, fear cracking his voice. "Get back here, damn it!" The tall man roared, but his command fell flat. Ranger lunged again, teeth sinking into the man's sleeve. Het twisted, trying to shake the shepherd loose, but the dog held firm. Strength born of rage and memory. Ethan moved fast, kicking the detonator aside before crouching to snatch it. His eyes landed on a small black case near the beam, half buried under a tarp. Inside, nestled between wires and batteries, lay a compact electronic device. Sleek, black, seamless, a data module. "Bingo," Ethan muttered. The tall man finally broke free from Rare's grip, his coat shredded. He shoved the dog aside with a growl of his own, grabbing a shard of metal from the floor and brandishing it like a blade. His eyes locked on Ethan. "You shouldn't have come here." Ranger moved before Ethan could raise his weapon. Despite the limp that still lingered from his old injuries, the shepherd hurled himself forward, knocking the man off balance. The makeshift weapon clattered to the floor as Ranger drove him backward into a pile of rusted cages. Metal groaned and collapsed around them. The man struggled beneath the dog's weight, curses drowned by snarls. Finally, he shoved Ranger off and staggered to his feet, but his resolve had cracked. The shepherd's relentless attack had broken the predator's composure. Without another word, the man sprinted toward the far exit, chasing after his fleeing partner. Ethan raised his pistol, sights locking on the retreating figure, but Ranger barked sharply, as if urging restraint. Ethan's finger hovered on the trigger, then eased off. Letting them run might be wiser. They would lead him to something larger. Within moments, both men had vanished into the storm, their footprints already filling with snow. The silence returned, broken only by Rare's heavy breathing. The shepherd limped back to Ethan, muzzle flecked with frost, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. Ethan crouched, ruffling the dog's neck gently. "You did good, Ranger." "Damn good." He secured the black case, tucking the encrypted devices safely into his coat. The charges, still wired to the beams, sent a chill down his spine. But without a detonator, they were harmless for now. He would call in the bomb squad later. Tonight, the priority was the device. Together, Ethan and Ranger stepped back into the snow. The wind tore across the ridge, swallowing all traces of the intruders. Ethan glanced down at Ranger, who limped, but kept pace beside him, head high despite the pain. "They tried to bury this place," Ethan said softly, gripping the case tighter. "But now we've got their secrets." Ranger barked once, sharp and resolute, as if promising that no matter the odds, they would not be silenced. The mountain stood quiet, but Ethan knew the storm had only just begun. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving Silverton Pass blanketed in a cruel white silence. Snow clung to the eaves of Dr. Harper's clinic as Ethan Cole pulled up, the black case heavy in his coat and Ranger close at his side. The shepherd moved slower this morning, his limp pronounced, but his amber eyes glowed with a restless fire. The collar around his neck still pulsed faintly, its crimson rhythm like a wound that refused to close. Inside, the clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine wood. Dr. Harper stood waiting, her graying hair pulled back into a neat bun, her spectacles catching the weak light. A second figure stood near her desk, a man Ethan hadn't seen before. He was in his early 50s, tall with a slight stoop from years hunched over electronics. His skin was pale, hands thin and dexterous, the kind that had soldered too many wires and typed too many late nights. His sharp brown eyes scanned Ethan quickly before moving to Ranger with quiet curiosity. "Ethan, this is Dr. Leonard Pierce," Harper said, motioning toward him. "An old colleague of mine from the State University. Retired now, but he used to consult on military technology contracts. If anyone can make sense of what you brought back, it's him." Pierce gave a polite nod. His voice was soft, clipped with a touch of wariness. "I don't like being dragged back into this world, Sheriff, but Margaret tells me it's important. Let's see the device." Ethan set the case on the desk. Pierce carefully lifted the collar from RER's neck, slipping on gloves before handling it. The shepherd winded softly, ears pinned, but relaxed when Ethan laid a hand on his back. The collar gleamed under the lamp, its black surface almost liquid in the light. No seams, no ports, just the steady pulse of red. Pierce frowned, rotating it slowly. "This isn't a tracking collar in the traditional sense. It's far more advanced. Do you see this note here? It isn't just transmitting. It's receiving." Harper's brow furrowed. "Receiving what?" "Commands," Pice answered flatly. "This is a neural regulator. Electrodes hidden beneath the band make contact with the skin, sending microp pulses to the nervous system. It can suppress natural instincts, amplify aggression, even redirect behavior entirely. In other words, it doesn't just track the dog, it turns him into a weapon." Ethan's stomach tightened. His eyes dropped to Ranger, who shifted uneasily, as if recognizing Pierce's words. "So he wasn't just a prisoner. He was controlled." Pierce nodded gravely. "Conditioned. Think of it like brainwashing, but mechanical. Whoever developed this didn't just want obedience. They wanted programmable soldiers on 4 legs. The words hung heavy in the room. Ethan rubbed his jaw, fury simmering under his calm exterior. "Ranger's not a weapon. He's a partner, and they tried to strip that from him." Harper's face tightened, her voice low but sharp. "They've done it before, Ethan. They've destroyed more lives than you know." She removed her glasses, setting them down with shaking fingers. "I haven't told you everything. You deserve to know why I care about this so deeply." Ethan looked up surprised. Harper drew a steadying breath. "My husband, Daniel Harper, was a federal investigator. Strong man, broad shoulders, a heart that was always 2 steps ahead of the rest of him. He loved animals, loved this town. 10 years ago, he was assigned to a classified inquiry. Dogs, missing K9 units, contracts buried under shell companies. He told me he was close to something. Then one night on the highway, his car went off the road. No witnesses, no skid marks, just silence. The case was buried before it even opened." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "Months later, I saw that falcon emblem in one of his old folders. Redstone Labs. I've never forgotten." The room was still. Ranger shifted closer to her, resting his head gently on her hand. Harper smiled faintly through the ache. "I promised myself I'd never let another soul suffer in their hands again," she whispered. "If your Ranger is living proof of what they've done, then I won't stand by. I'll see this through, Ethan." For Daniel, Ethan's throat tightened. He had always known Harper as the steady, kind-hearted vet who treated every stray with the same care as a show dog. Now he saw the steel beneath her gentleness, forged by grief and sharpened by years of silence. Pierce cleared his throat, setting the collar back into the case. "What you have here is not just evidence. It's a confession. If we can extract the data stored inside, we'll have the names of those involved, maybe even the locations of their facilities. But the encryption will be brutal. Redstone didn't want their secrets spilled." Ethan nodded. "Then we crack it." Pierce gave him a long look. "You don't understand. Whoever still runs Redstone, they'll be watching. The moment this device comes online, they'll know. It's a beacon. Ranger growled low as if sensing the danger. Harper straightened, her voice firm. Then let them come. We're done hiding from shadows. It's time they know we're not afraid. Ethan placed his hand on the case, his voice steady. They thought they could erase Ranger, but he's here alive. And as long as he's breathing, their crimes won't stay buried. Ranger barked once, sharp and resolute as if swearing an oath. The storm outside had quieted, but inside the clinic, a different storm was gathering. The secrets of the collar had cracked open the first layer of Redstone's web, and now Ethan, Harper, Pierce, and Ranger stood at its center, knowing full well that exposing the truth would come at a cost, but unwilling to turn away. The mountains outside Silverton Pass were cloaked in fog when Ethan Cole set out before dawn. His cruiser crawled along the frozen service road, headlights cutting thin beams through the mist. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, his ears alert, amber eyes fixed on the ridge ahead, as if he already knew what awaited them. The device they had recovered from the warehouse had pulsed faintly through the night, and with Dr. Pierce's help, they had traced its last transmission to a cluster of coordinates deep within the range. Somewhere inside the mountain lay the heart of Redstone's operations. Ethan parked at a turnout where the road ended in a snow-packed trail. He strapped on his winter gear, checked his sidearm, and secured a tactical flashlight to his chest. Ranger leapt down beside him, nose already pressed to the ground. The shepherd's frame still bore the lean lines of hardship, but weeks of care had restored muscle to his shoulders, and there was a sharp, unyielding pride in the way he moved. The path narrowed into a gorge, flanked by sheer rock walls dusted with ice. Ranger sniffed the snow, then veered sharply left, barking once. Ethan followed, pushing through a thicket of pines, until they stumbled upon a ventilation shaft half buried beneath snowdrifts. A faint hum drifted from below, machines still running. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, crouching to study the shaft. Rust streaked the edges, but new footprints cut through the snow. Someone had been here recently. A sudden snap of branches made him freeze. He turned, weapon raised. A figure emerged from the trees, bundled in a heavy parka with goggles pulled up on her forehead. She was lean, mid-30s, with auburn hair escaping her hood, and freckles scattered across pale cheeks. Her sharp green eyes met Ethan's without fear. "Easy," she said, raising her hands. "Name's Claire Donovan, journalist. I've been tracking Redstone for months." Ethan didn't lower his weapon immediately. "Journalist out here in the middle of nowhere." Claire smirked, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Call it an unhealthy obsession. My brother was AK-9 officer. His partner vanished during a raid. The brass said it was lost in the chaos. I didn't believe them. That's how I found your trail." Her voice cracked briefly, but she steadied it. "If you're going in, I'm coming with you." Ethan studied her. There was no mistaking the weariness in her stance or the bitterness in her tone. She wasn't here for glory. She was here for truth. He finally lowered his weapon. "Stay close. Don't slow us down." Ranger gave a sniff at her boots, then turned back to the shaft, tail low, but accepting. The three of them descended into the mountain through the shaft, the steel ladder groaning under their weight. The air grew colder, thicker with the metallic tang of machinery. The tunnel opened into a narrow corridor carved directly into the rock. Fluorescent lights flickered above, and the walls bore the emblem they had come to fear, a red falcon etched in paint. Ranger growled, the sound reverberating against the stone. They moved cautiously, following the pulse of the tracker Ethan had clipped to his vest. Twice Ranger stopped them just in time. Once when he sniffed out a pressure plate hidden beneath the snow-stained floor tiles. Another when his ears perked at the faint hum of a motion sensor down a side hall. Each time Ethan crouched to disable the traps, silently thanking the dog's instincts. At the heart of the facility, they found a wide chamber lined with steel cages. Rust streaked the bars, and Tuff's offer clung to the corners. Ethan's stomach churned at the sight. Each cage bore a tag with serial numbers instead of names. Ranger pressed close to the bars, nose quivering, and gave a low, mournful whine. He remembered this place. On a central desk lays of files bound in black folders. Ethan opened one and froze. Inside were detailed records of canine units, photographs, surgical notes, behavioral reports, dogs stolen from police departments and military bases across the country, cataloged like equipment. Their fates were listed in cold clinical handwriting. Subject terminated, subject compliant, subject unstable. Claire covered her mouth, eyes wide with horror. They turned them into experiments. All of them. Ethan's grip tightened on the file, and Ranger survived it. He glanced down at the shepherd, who stood rigid, teeth bared at the memories. Before they could search further, the sound of boots echoed down the corridor. A squad of guards in black tactical gear stormed into the chamber, rifles raised. The leader, a thick-set man with a square jaw and cold gray eyes, barked in order. "Drop your weapons." Now Ethan shoved Claire behind a steel cabinet, drawing his pistol. The room exploded into chaos. Asa gunfire ricocheted off the walls. Ethan returned fire, dropping one guard, but more poured in from the hallway. Ranger moved like lightning, darting between cages, his lean frame a blur. He lunged at a guard who had broken from the formation, sinking his teeth into the man's arm and dragging him down. Another guard swung his rifle toward Ethan's exposed flank. Ethan turned too late. Ranger launched from the ground, slamming into the attacker with a force that knocked the man's rifle clattering across the floor. The shepherd's snarl drowned out the man's shout, jaws snapping inches from his face. Ethan fired, dropping the guard before he could recover. The leader cursed, signaling retreat. The surviving guards dragged their wounded comrade back into the hall, covering their escape with a volley of bullets. Then silence. Only the hum of machines remained. Ethan crouched, hand trembling slightly as he ruffled Rare's fur. "You saved my life," he whispered. Ranger pressed against his chest, tail thumping once against the floor. Claire emerged, pale but steady. "We need to get those files out. The world has to see this." Ethan nodded grimly, tucking the folders into his pack. "And Redstone's going to know we were here." Ranger barked once, a sharp sound that seemed to echo the vow in Ethan's voice. For the first time since stepping into the mountain, Ethan felt that the shadows didn't hold all the power. Tonight they had struck back and lived to tell of it. The mountain air was crisp, filled with the echo of snowmelt dripping from the high ridges as Ethan Cole drove back into Silverton Pass. The pack on the passenger seat bulged with the stolen files, and Ranger sat proudly in the back, head lifted, amber eyes gleaming with a mixture of relief and resilience. The shepherd's body bore scars, his gait still uneven, but his spirit had never burned brighter. Days passed in a blur of reports, sealed evidence, and tense debriefings. The files from the underground facility had been passed to federal investigators, and Redstone Labs' empire of shadows began to crumble. Their emblems were stripped from the walls, their men dragged into the light one by one. Arrests spread across states as agents traced the network from the mountains to the cities. Newspapers carried headlines of K9 experiments exposed, while televised hearings brought survivors' stories into living rooms across America. Claire Donovan became the face of that exposure. Standing before cameras with her auburn hair pulled back neatly, she spoke with clarity and fire. She described cages lined in rust, files stamped with serial numbers, and voices of officers who had lost their partners to the silence of Redstone's theft. Though her voice trembled when she mentioned her brother's dog, she never faltered. In her reporting, the public finally understood the scope of what had been hidden. Ethan kept his distance from the spotlight, preferring the silence of his cabin and the steady company of Ranger. Still, duty required him to testify. At a federal hearing in Denver, he sat stiff in his uniform, his storm-gay eyes unyielding as he recounted the ambushes, the collar, and the files filled with cruelty. Across the chamber, executives in tailored suits squirmed under the weight of exposure. One man, Richard Halverson, stood out. In his 60s, lean with slicked-back silver hair and a politician's smile, Halverson had once chaired Redstone's research division. When pressed about the experiments, his voice was smooth and evasive. But when Ethan placed the collar on the table before him, the black surface glinting under the lights, Halverson's mask slipped. A hush filled the room. For a moment, everyone understood that no denial could wash away the truth. Back in Silverton Pass, life began to reclaim its rhythm. Dr. Harper, once the grieving widow haunted by her husband's unsolved death, found a measure of closure, as the files confirmed what she had long suspected. Daniel Harper haddied for being too close to Redstone's secrets. With quiet dignity, she continued her work at the clinic, healing strays and comforting families. Her grief tempered now with the satisfaction that justice had not forgotten. Ranger, too, began to heal in ways deeper than scars. Ethan filed the paperwork himself, formal recognition that Ranger had served as a K-9 officer, endured capture, and survived against all odds. The department approved his discharge with full honors. On the morning of the ceremony, Ranger wore a polished badge on his collar, the symbol of his service gleaming against hissable fur. The town gathered in the square, snowflakes swirling gently around them. Children clutched their parents' hands, pointing at the shepherd with wide eyes. Officers in uniform lined the steps of the courthouse, their breath misting in the cold. Claire stood with her notebook closed for once, smiling quietly. Dr. Harper held a small bouquet, her expression soft and proud. Ethan walked Ranger up the steps, his boots crunching in the snow. The mayor, a stocky man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake, stood waiting. His voice carried across the crowd. Today we honor a hero who was lost and returned. Ranger, once a K-9 in service of justice, endured unspeakable trials and still stood by the side of those who needed him. He represents loyalty, courage, and the bond between man and animal that no cruelty can erase. Ranger barked once, a deep, commanding sound that echoed against the mountain walls. The crowd erupted in applause, their voices rising like the wind through the pines. Children laughed, clapping in delight, while officers saluted. Ethan crouched, resting a hand on Rare's neck. The shepherd pressed close, tail sweeping through the snow. In that moment, Ethan felt the weight of the past month's lift not erased, but transformed into something worth carrying. When the ceremony ended, Ethan lingered on the courthouse steps. The snow fell more heavily now, blanketing the town in white. Ranger sat beside him, his chest rising steady and strong. "Feels like a miracle," Ethan murmured, watching the flakes settle in Rare's fur. "Like you were meant to come back to remind us that justice doesn't die. It waits. And when the time comes, it rises." Ranger turned his head, amber rays catching the light, and gave a soft bark. Ethan smiled. He knew the shepherd understood. The town dispersed, but the echo of that bark lingered in the air, clear, defiant, and eternal. For Silverton Pass, Ranger was no longer just a dog. He was a symbol carved into the heart of winter, that loyalty and courage could outlast even the darkest schemes. And for Ethan, Ranger was more than a partner. He was proof that even in the coldest of mountains, miracles could still be found. At the end of Rare's journey, one truth stood above all else. A dog's loyalty is not just instinct. It is a gift from God. Ranger was stolen, broken, and marked as nothing more than an experiment. Yet he returned as a living symbol of courage, faith, and redemption. His story reminds us that even in the darkest valleys, God can bring light, and what was once lost can be restored. In our daily lives, we may face struggles that make us feel forgotten or trapped. But just like Ranger, we are never beyond the reach of God's grace. Miracles are not always thunder and lightning. Sometimes they are a faithful companion at your side, a second chance, or the quiet assurance that justice will rise again. If you believe in miracles, share this story so that others may find hope. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith and courage. May God bless you and your family. And if you felt His hand in this story, type Amen in the comments as a prayer of gratitude.